Hello, and thank you so much for joining me once again. I have a fun collaboration for you today. I'm super excited. I collaborated with Joe Sows, another YouTuber, which I will put a link down below for you. And we decided to do something Christmassy and festive. So I have not seen his video yet. I'm super pumped. I hope you are too, and I hope you go check him out after this. But yeah, with that in mind, we've got a Christmas video. It is a long one because there's a lot of pieces to this project, and I really hope you enjoy seeing it come together. So after a truly unreasonable amount of trial and error, we've got, oh, this is wrong. Alright, we've got version 5 of everything. Except the collar, which I just drafted now, and I'm really hoping works because I'm sick of drafting. Basically, simple back piece. Front, we've got a dart, and then the yoke actually functions as another dart for bust shaping purposes. And then collar is going to stand up. It is not Peter Pan collar. It actually, I forget what they're called, Mandarin maybe? Sleeve, we want a lot of poof up top, we want a lot of poof at the bottom. And this is actually version 4. I have not sewn version 5. The sleeve I love. This actually isn't changing at all. The yoke I felt is a little bit too high, so I brought that down about 1/4 of an inch. I like that it's a little bit roomy, not like a lot roomy, but a little bit roomy. And for the design, I kind of want to maybe like put some vertical lace down this way, or maybe a couple of buttons up here. That's part of why this needed to come down, because it's just too high. And yeah, so something kind of nice and poofy and Lolita-y, and we'll give it a go. Alright, so we got most of our pieces, and you might note that the collar piece looks very different. It is essentially the same piece. I just decided to try to cut down on bulk by, instead of making this a seam that is sewn, that it is something that is, oh, I realized I just messed up. That's not. So after discovering that making my pattern, I thought I was being so clever, and I just completely forgot to take the seam allowance out of the top, which obviously was the whole point in the first place. So I don't know what I was thinking there. Luckily though, I can still use the piece that I had cut out. I just mark my stitching line and cut it down. And I do that for both sides of the collar. Then I decide to figure out which trim I want to use. This went on for quite a while, and it's literally just playing around with ideas. I didn't end up liking the stuff on the side like that, and I literally opened every single white lace that I own just to try them all. I think you get the idea. We'll skip ahead. Basically, I just top stitched down all of these pieces. I did use a zigzag stitch to catch the 2 pieces of lace that I sewed just there, and then I switched over to straight stitch to do this narrower piece in the center. I also went ahead and basted the lace that's going to be coming out from the yoke seam. Alright, so after some experimenting, I ended up with this, and this part is gonna fold over like that. So I really quite like that. I think that's pretty cute. I don't know. I considered putting some around the neckline, but I'm a little afraid that the bulk here is gonna mess up the collar in a major way. Like, I'm pretty sure it already is going to mess up the collar in a major way. So, we shall see. In the end, I might make a much simpler collar that's just straight across, which would be a shame because it's a little bit more boring, but we'll see. I move on to pinning my darts and stitching those. I decided to try a different way to pin, and it's alright. I just stuck a pin in the very tip of the dart to kind of mark my place before lining the rest of the dart up to pin. It works pretty good. I don't know. I don't know if I'll keep doing it, but after that I moved on to stitching the collar pieces, which I very, very carefully followed the line I had drawn because they're quite tight curves. Then we sew those darts down. Apologies for the mess in the background, by the way. I was feeling very scattered, and that tends to get reflected in my workspace. I also decided to run my gather stitches on the sleeves because I knew I was going to need a lot of them. I like to do 2 gather stitches per seam because they tend to make nice even gathers compared to just a single stitch. But it can be kind of time consuming. After that, we clip down the inside of the collar piece, and I graded the seams on the inside, so one is longer than the other, and that keeps as much stability as possible while also taking out as much bulk as possible. So if you cut both down, sometimes your seam can pop. So I thought the collar piece was looking pretty good. I was still considering putting lace on the collar in some way. I eventually decided not to. I then pinned the yoke to the rest of the shirt. I then pinned the sleeve to the cuff by gathering it. And even on small gathers like this, I have the tendency to mark the middle, and I don't know, it just makes it a little bit easier to keep everything even and neat. I am keeping the majority of the poof towards the center there because I don't think it needs as much poof on the inside of the arm as on the outside of the arm. And I'm going to stitch the shoulder seams down at the same time. I don't know if you've noticed, but especially when I'm sewing a big project, I have the tendency to condense as many steps as I can so that I'm not bouncing from the work table to the sewing machine to the work table. And it can be a little confusing when it comes to like, what order do you have to do everything in? Well, in a lot of sewing, there doesn't need to be, like, certain things have a specific order that they need, but beyond that, you can do a bunch of different things all at once. And I tend to take advantage of that because I just find it's much less getting up and walking around. Things take a lot less time. Okay, so I hit the point where I needed to start finishing things. Did you notice at the beginning I didn't use my pinking shears or any fray check? It's because I have a serger now. I'm so excited. It's fun. But I hit a point where, yeah, these internal seams all needed to be finished, so I quick ran those through the serger. This is looking fun. I am quite excited. And yeah, so you can see I did iron this flat. I am going to stitch over, but I am also at the same time going to stitch a bit of lace over that. I just think there's a weird little knot here that I don't like. I might trim that off. So there we go. I wanted it to lay completely flat. I didn't want it sticking up out of the seam. And I figured just top stitching it down was probably going to be the easiest way to do that. And if I'm being totally honest, I definitely forgot. So I don't want to rip anything, especially something that's been serged. We'll do it this way. I also decided to set the sleeves at this point, and one of the great things about setting sleeves with gathers is that it's really, really easy. You line up the center and you line up the edges like normal, and then you just use the gathering stitches to squish it all in where you want it to go, as opposed to something without gathers where you have to try to make it all smooth all the time. This is kind of a refreshing break from that. The only trick though is that when you do sew it, you want to make sure that your gathers are only on the sleeve and that there's no puckers on the shirt side, because that will be noticeable and not look very good. So do keep that in mind. And we are back to the sewing machine to stitch all of that in place. One of the things I am doing to try and make sure that my shirt does not get puckered is I am stitching with the gathered sleeve cap down. Now, I think I'm kind of an oddball. When I stitch gathers, I usually prefer that the gathered part be on top so I can see it going in and ensure that it goes in evenly. I guess most people have a better time doing the gathered part on the bottom. I've never gotten that to work for me very well. But it kind of becomes a matter of priorities. It is more important to me that the shirt not pucker than that the gathers be pristine, so that is the part that goes on top, and that is the part that I monitor closely. So up next is the collar, which I have a very hard time getting even, and you can see I started pinning everything in place here and then immediately changed my mind, and it was to essentially stitch a stay stitch around the collar so that I could clip it and pin it easier. I lost the footage for that, So we're gonna jump straight over to zigzagging the two ends together just in the seam allowance and then stitching the collar down. And I apologize, I wish I had that footage, but it has vanished. Once that's been sewn down, it actually sticks up like it's supposed to, which is exciting, so I immediately start pinning the side seams and the sleeves. Which I then sew down with a straight stitch. So, fitting notes, definitely going to tack the seam allowance behind here, and probably here too. There is a little bit of weirdness going on with the shoulders and the underarm. For some reason the bust ended up super tight despite all of my best efforts. But overall, and I love this cute sleeve, I love it and I'm pretty happy. And you know, not everything ends up completely pristine, I guess. I am going to probably try to cut some stuff out of this particular seam because the added lace over top made this extremely bulky. So before I go through the serger, I'm going to cut some of that extra lace out because it just doesn't need to be there. And yeah, like overall though, this is what I wanted it to look like and I'm pretty happy about that. Okay. So we've got the back nice and serged, the bottom nice and serged. Now for the back, I have a strong preference to fold the top edge over, but not the bottom edge. The bottom edge isn't going to unravel because it's serged, and I feel like folding that over, even though it's going to be hidden, just adds bulk in the back where I don't want it. So with that in mind, I cut my Velcro, which I probably didn't need to cut quite such a long piece. And this stuff is so wide that I cut it in half because I just don't need that much width, and I like to try to conserve it, which is why I'm a little mad that I cut it so long when I didn't need to. But, you know, live and learn. I take forever pinning this down because I'm going to sew that edge flat at the same time as I sew my Velcro on. This is a little bit trickier to do than if you just basted it down ahead of time, but I also folded up the edge of the back hem because even though the hem is going to be what I do last, I want it already folded up and under that Velcro so it's out of the way. I considered putting lace on the hem and I think it would have looked super cute, but this shirt is going to be you're getting tucked in to so many things that piece is going to be under everything anyway, so I figured I'd leave it off. And very, very carefully stitch along the edge of your Velcro. I try to get it as close to the edge as I can, but it's a learning curve. Like, Velcro is kind of a pain in the butt. Even the super thin, nice stuff isn't the easiest. And here I just decided to make good on that whole tacking down the seams because of the bulk. It did end up helping. And here she is. Somehow the fit bothers me more. I think it's because the darts are so misplaced. And it's really quite bothering me a lot. And the ripples up on the yoke isn't great. The V wrinkles in the back are also not great. I thought maybe if I try it on a doll with a smaller bust, maybe that'll help. And it does look better. The bust darts are closer to the right place, but they're still not right. The wrinkles in the back are still not great. Ultimately, for as happy as I was making this, I didn't like it. I ended up remaking it. I know I didn't record this because the process of putting it together was almost exactly the same. I left the lace off the middle and I ended up switching the lace out, going across the yoke, and I just top stitched it. We're not going to talk about the fact that I could have probably top stitched it without it having an actual real yoke, because I'm upset about it after, what was it, 6 drafts. Alright, so we are going to start the skirt, which I have decided not to completely rebuild something that has already been designed. So the waistband of this is actually a heavily altered Requiem Arts pattern, which I will link down below. Keep in mind, if you do decide to purchase it, look at her pictures versus what I am doing, because this is very, very different. I smoothed this curve a little bit. I obviously cut this piece, and we made what's going to be our modesty panel. And then for the skirt, I decided to go with a gathered circle skirt, something you have not seen on my channel, but if you go visit my Collab partner, you will see his video, and he is actually the inspiration for that, so thank you so much. I'm excited to see how this will turn out. I do have side seams, as you can see. I was really trying very hard to conserve fabric because I like this stuff. It's nice. This is one of those fabrics that's really interesting because I had cut these pieces intending for this to be the top, but, and I don't know how well you can see it on camera. Oh no, you can totally tell. Yeah, so like, it almost looks like a totally different color because the grain is different. So if we flip it this way, it matches, and it will hopefully just blend into the background and be a nice little modesty panel for our laces. So without further ado, I need to cut my lining fabric because I really do think this is going to need lining. It's gonna need to be a little bit, I'd say beefier. I might even interface the lining, and off we go. I did end up interfacing the lining because even though this isn't technically a corset, I want it to not wrinkle around the waist. Okay, so we've stitched the front and the top. I'm not doing the back because I want to finish that all at once, and I'm not doing the bottom because, well, there's no reason to. I'm still going to need that seam allowance to stitch the skirt to it. We've got our little modesty panel, and we've got the other side. Modesty panel goes up one side, across the top, down the other side. Now we are going to trim these corners liberally, because getting this to turn inside out is probably not going to be very fun. So we get our little corners all trimmed up. And I am also going to trim this. The lining with the interfacing is incredibly bulky, and we want as little of that involved on the inside of this as we can. So I leave about 1/8 of an inch, just because of course the stitching lines need something. After that, I get my watercolor white pencil and I use that to poke the corners all out nicely. You can use pretty much anything for that. I just like the white pencil because it doesn't leave any obvious markings and comes to a pretty decent point. Okay, so I'm trying to figure out what order to sew all this in, and I think I need to set the grommets sooner rather than later. As much as I absolutely hate to do that, because then it means I am going to be sewing around grommets. However, I think if I bust out the zipper foot and I just go very, very carefully, I think it will be okay. Yeah, because I need this to be all one piece to attach the skirt. So after I marked all my spots, I start poking a hole in one of the pieces and getting my grommet through is kind of proving to be difficult. A traditional awl gets wider and wider and wider. My tool is something that came with something else, so it actually doesn't get very wide at all. So it kind of made getting that grommet in there a little bit tricky. And I ended up damaging the fabric a little, but I was willing to keep going and get my hair in the camera, which is nice. Anyway, after much struggling, I'm finally ready to set the grommet, and I realized my tool doesn't seem to fit. I stubbornly try it anyway and get the grommet stuck in it, like a genius, and I keep trying, and it keeps not working. So I've stalled out on the top of the waistband because I don't have anything to set these with, apparently. So I shelf that part of the project and move on to the skirt, where I line up the right sides of the fabric and sew the side seams. I also took a moment to cut out the faux fur, and yeah, that stuff is truly obnoxious to cut. It gets on everything. My grommet set came finally, so I was able to do a couple of test grommets to see both how I like the color and how they worked, and they're great. I love them. I'm definitely using gold, so in the end I got to use the color I wanted, though I didn't particularly care for wrecking a piece just to get there. But even though they're a little bit smaller, I think they're going to work perfectly for what I wanted. So I line up the already marked piece and remark the new piece I made and get my hair all up in there. Oh, that's lovely. I use the cutting tool that they provide, and it doesn't work great with the wood. Like, it works okay. It really damages the wood, but I mean, that's what it's there for, so that's not a big deal. But yeah, I still have to cut the little pieces out. It works so much better to do it against the metal, but of course that's going to make the tool itself dull much, much faster. So I don't know which is the better option. Oh my goodness, I keep getting my head in the shot. When I got new grommets, I did get the two-piece kind, so they've got a front and a back, and I do like those a lot more. So I did set all those grommets, and then I did stitch the modesty panel on a lot lower than I thought I would need to, but that was because it was peeking over the edges of the sides. So after the waistband is finally mostly done, I got to gather up the skirt and stitch that to the waistband. I love this material so much because it gathered so easily. It's a little slippery to sew with, but I love how nicely it gathered. I run that through the sewing machine, and I am careful when I go over the very center to make sure that I'm not going to hit any of the grommets. And I love how the skirt looks. It's got so much nice poof. I do decide to lace it up now because the top gaping the way it was making me a little nervous. I wanted to make sure that I had stitched it straight and that it wasn't, you know, gonna lay funny when it was on. But in the end, it just needed the laces to hold it together and it was fine. I am going to run the back through the serger and figure out how I want to close that. Okay, so this is what I ended up deciding to do. I did leave this one just serged, and this other side I did top stitch down. I figured the top, like how it looks when it's on, is the most important bit. So that's kind of what I prioritized here. And this serger thread I just stitched into the seam and then snipped. This one, however, is not going to get stitched into anything, so what we need to actually do is finish it off in some way or another. And even though there's not going to be any weight on here, I just feel like it's good practice. I just did that in 2 seconds and I was going to show you what I was doing. Oh no. Well, when you pull your serger thread apart, you'll notice that there's 2 short ones that were the length you cut it to, and then 2 really long ones. I think these ones are called the loopers. And the loopers are the ones that are zigzagging back and forth like this, whereas the 2 shorter ones are the straight stitches. So because we don't want this to unravel, I pulled the chain apart and I'm going to tie the short ones around the long ones. Once and then twice going the other way. So we're basically making just a tiny little square knot. Pull it nice and tight, and then I snip these little guys fairly short. I mean, it's still a knot. You could get a needle out and bury it, but frankly these little guys don't really bother me all that much. So squish them to the back, and now you've got a nice serger end that's not gonna just unravel the second you look at it funny, which is what they like to do if you don't finish them. So now I think I'm gonna go with snaps on the back, just because I like them, they're easy, and they look nice. I've got little white ones that'll look just cute. So that is where we're going from there. After that is, well, gotta iron the seam quick because that's driving me nuts. But after that, it's finishing the cape and then all of the horrifying hand stitching that I've been putting off. Yay! And you might have seen me use this before. It's just a setter tool for putting these plastic snaps in. I like the plastic snaps because I feel like they are less likely to damage vinyl dolls, especially vinyl dolls because they're so soft, but also resin dolls. And their downfall is that they are a little thicker, and sometimes that can mess with the fit of your item. But I do really like them because they're so quick and easy to put on. Here's that cape that I kind of just mentioned once and then never again. Uh, I did have to draft this. It went through a few iterations before I came up with this really simple design that I feel like looks the way I wanted it to. I didn't want it to be super complicated. Okay, so we've got this bag lined so it looks nice on the inside and on the outside. And I've been thinking long and hard about where I want to put the fur trim. And in the end, I really want to have the two gold grommets and then have it tie together with a piece of this ribbon. And I just didn't think it would look as good if it went over this big poofy, you know, and I didn't want it to just not have a clasp. So I think I'm going to trim the top edge to still give it that nice little poof of fur, but also keep these edges kind of clean. And I don't know if that's the right choice to make, but it's the choice that I am making. I still need to stitch that hole together, and yeah, at this point it's all just finishing work. I gotta get my grommets out again. I will set the grommets after I have stitched the fur on, and this is, I mean, for anybody worried, this is absolutely faux fur. It has been sewn together. So the hand stitching begins. I included some footage of this, and I wanted to show you that thread I'm using because it is special thread designed for hand sewing, which it turns out actually makes your life so much easier. Don't just use whatever's in your sewing machine. It's very frustrating. This stuff works a lot nicer, and even though I was dealing with faux fur, which is never fun in the best of times, it made this job a lot easier. I'm basically just whip stitching this down, trying desperately not to catch the fur, but to catch the fabric under the fur. And it did get easier as I went, and I think I might use hand stitching more in the future because this thread specifically just makes it that much easier and the results are pretty nice. I don't know that I want to ever use faux fur again. Of course, I have projects planned that use it, so I'm probably going to use it again. But oh my gosh, it's so obnoxious. But with all the hand stitching done, it's done. Yay! I have to give full credit to my friend Inaki for coming up with the pom-poms on the laces idea because it just adds that perfect, adorable little pop. I think it just ties into the whole Christmas thing perfectly. And yes, I am so thrilled with how this ended up turning out. It was a rough ride. You might have been able to tell by the state of my workspace at any given time during this video, but it was very thrown together. I kind of left everything in the order that it happened so you could see how much I was jumping from one thing to the next thing, just trying to get stuff done and trying to figure out what I was even doing. But in the end, I think the results were great. I'm so happy with how she turned out. Merry Christmas to those who celebrate, and happy holidays to those who don't. I really hope you have a good end of the year, and I'm really excited about what 2020 is going to bring. Please check out my collaborator in this fun Christmas project, Joe. His YouTube is fun and doesn't just include Smart Doll stuff. He actually does other alterations as well, so that is super useful stuff. And yeah, if you like this video, please like and subscribe. Stick around, there's definitely more to come, and I hope you have a great one. Bye bye.